2nd, 1995. The survivor is Ervin Rosenfeld, Rosenfeld. The interviewer is Marianne Kador, Kadar, and we are in Woodbury, USA. The interview is conducted in English. October 22nd, 1995. The survivor is Ervin Rosenfeld, Rosenfeld. The interviewer is Marianne Kador, Kador. We are in Woodbury, in the USA. The interview is conducted in English. Would you please tell us your name and spell it?
Yes, it's Ervin, Ervin, Rosenfeld, Rosenfeld.
This was the name you were born with?
Yes, I was.
Did you have any nicknames?
Not that I know of.
And could we have your birth date, please?
March 1st, 1934.
Where?
Budapest, Hungary.
Budapest, Hungary. Tell us a little bit about your early childhood, the way you remember it.
I was born into a family that I had two sisters older than I am, 7.5 and 8.5 years older. Edith was 8.5 years older, Erica was 7.5 years older. My father, Samuel, was a traveling salesman. My mother, Charlotte, was a housewife. We lived in an apartment house in Terrace Curves Farmings in Budapest. We were an Orthodox family. We went to the Kaczynski Utsai synagogue. We were religious, and we had what I thought was a wonderful life. We celebrated all the holidays.
You remember going with your father to the temple?
Yes, we used to go every
The whole family
Saturday.
went?
The women and Orthodox women do not go Friday nights. They would go Saturday morning with us. And then my mother used to prepare cholent, and we would deliver it to the baker Friday afternoon. And at that time they would stop the ovens, and the ovens would be still hot. And then when we come out of the synagogue Saturday afternoon, we'd pick up that was our dinner. Our main dinners were always around lunchtime, what we would call here. I also attended religious school, like parochial school. And our life was normal, nothing special till...
Financially comfortable?
Yes, we had a maid. We lived very comfortably. In the summertime, we would go back to my parents' village, which was Nagyleta.
How do you spell that?
Nagyleta.
And that was in what region?
That was near Debrecen, about 25, 30 kilometers from Debrecen. And it was closer to close to Transylvania, where we had relatives living, because it used to be Hungary before it became Romania.
You had grandparents there?
No, my grandparents died before I was born in Nagyleta. I had a lot of cousins and uncles and aunts. They all lived there. They all owned stores. And we would just summer.
Mm-hmm.
And
how do you remember your home life? You had a lot of relatives who came to visit?
Yes, we lived in the capital of Hungary, and anybody from wherever part of Hungary that had any business there, they would come to us, stay with us, and conduct their business. We always had a lot of people staying with us. I had a cousin that lived with us, and we always had people around. My father was a musician also, besides being a salesman, and he would come back from musical theaters and take his violin and play the whole score for us. And he would take me to he belonged to a club, salesman's club, and He would take me on Sunday afternoons over there too, when he was with his friends. We would go to the park. I mean, we just did all normal, regular things.
Anything special standing out in your mind about that time, the first 6, 7 years of your life?
No, I was not a good eater. My mother used to chase me around to make me eat. We just enjoyed the family and friends, and we always visited people. They always visited us. I had friends. The apartment building we lived in was not only Jewish. There were a lot of Christian people living there too. And I was friendly with a boy who was not Jewish, and they would invite me in for Christmas to show the tree and the presents, and it was.
There was a lot of interaction with non-Jewish.
Yes, we had friends who were mixed. There was mixed marriages in the building. My sisters knew a lot of the girls their age, some who were not Jewish. My sisters also went to parochial school, same school I went to, but instead of grade school, they were already on higher education.
You were born in 1934. Did you notice some changes in the early 40s?
Well, they started to put out some laws against Jews, and I remember my father had to hire a Christian to be the representative of the work he was doing, which was sales. He sold wood products like skis, sleds, pencil boxes, canes, all different kind of things. And the factory was not in Budapest. It was in a smaller part, and he used to have to travel by train to customers and all of that. But every Friday afternoon he would come home and usually bring with him either a duck or a goose or chickens that was cooked. We had to take to the shaykh, had to have him cut the throats, and then my mother and the maid would make Shabbos dinner out of that. We always had Friday night was a big meal, and Saturday was Shabbos, and all we did was spend it together after the synagogue, and then Havdalah came, and every Saturday night my father would bless us. It was a very nice life.
When you talk about it, I could see it on your face, that very warm feeling. You were the youngest in the family.
Yes, I was the youngest.
The only boy in the family.
Only boy, and my father adored me. And my sisters were, well, I was the brat, and whenever they had to go out to the park, they had to take me with them, and it interfered with them meeting with boys. They always had to bribe me so I didn't say anything at home. And there's a movie theater right in our building, and then we used to go to the movies over there.
On Terrace Court.
Terrace Court.
What was the movie? House.
I don't remember the name, but it was in the building, so it was a dairy in the building. It was a very easy life over there. We were near the, you got the railroad terminal, walking distance, so people getting off that train, there's no problem getting to us.
Mm-hmm. And you walked to school every day?
Well, we could take the trolley.
By yourself?
Well, after a while, yes. And in the beginning, I'm sure my sisters took me. Mm-hmm. And we could walk also. It wasn't that far away.
Mm-hmm. Your mother was also a dressmaker.
My mother was a dressmaker. My sisters also learned to be dressmakers.
Did they do that from home? Did they have some business at home?
I don't think they did some at home. They did their own clothes. Basically, my sister Edith was a pattern maker. She studied that in school. And they did all the sewing for everybody.
Did you and your father ever talk about what kind of future he would like you to have?
We never got that far. I was too young. But I do remember that he used to have to split his income with that Christian guy. It started in 1942, 43, when they were passing a bunch of laws against Jews owning businesses, things like that. They restricted travel. As long as Admiral Horthy was in power, we really didn't suffer too much.
Did your father explain to you these new laws and the reason?
No, I would
behind
just
them?
hear what he was talking to my mother.
You just overheard the
Just overheard it.
conversation.
Children were really, I was too young to be really part of it. We also had a large radio. We used to listen to the broadcast shortwave from England, from different places. They would have Hungarian broadcast, and we'd listen to that, and we knew what happened to the war. We also, obviously, saw all the propaganda about the war. That was a big place where the millennium, the 1,000-year anniversary of Hungary was celebrated, and that was where all the people were gathering when news were being told. And it was walking distance from the house. I used to walk there a lot, and we would see propaganda posters about Jews and Germans and all kinds of material. So we knew there was problems.
How about in school? Was there any discussion about
Well, it was, no, parochial school, we concentrated on learning the Chumash, the Gemara. It was really not discussion about the secular life.
Did you study Hebrew?
Oh, we all could read and write Hebrew by the time you were in 2nd or 3rd grade.
And you studied Hebrew and English?
No, I didn't study English
No
in
English
Hungary.
at all.
We actually, my sister studied German, because once you went out of the, you would call grade schools, they were given different, German was like a second language in Hungary.
Did you finish the parochial education and enter the...
No, I only went through till 1944. It was March 1944 when the Germans came in.
Did you belong to any youth organization?
Not at that time, afterwards.
What was that?
Aguda Yisrael. It was an Orthodox youth group. But that happened later.
Later. Were you doing any sports while in school?
No, you played soccer, basically. We called it football.
Football, Did you see any atrocities towards young children who went to that school?
Well, they were all Jewish children at that school, but we all had piases, and we would have people pull the piases when we were on the street, on a trolley car, things like that. But nothing out of it wasn't overt.
It was more like a prank.
Yeah, and that was basically, of course, everything changed when we had to start wearing this yellow star. Then we were getting harassed a lot, and it was difficult to go to school.
Was your father in the Hungarian army?
He was in World War I. He was a decorated soldier in World War I. In the Hungarian army, he was a telephone operator. He was gassed, and he had a lot of medals. And I basically learned how to read by reading his proclamations from the army of what kind of a soldier he was. And by the time I was 3 years old, I was reading Hungarian.
You taught yourself how
Yes.
to read. When the restrictions started, did your father talk to you about that being in the army in the First World War might protect him?
Yes, he felt that having all those medals and everything else, he would be treated differently. And when they were called up to serve in the work brigades,
In the first labor camps?
well, there were camps, but they were work camps. The Jewish men were called up by their year of birth, and then they would go into these battalions where they were doing road work, hard labor.
This was in lieu of military service?
This was during the war, where they felt that they wanted the Jewish men out of the regular life. And what happened was, when the Germans came in March 1944, for a short period of time, we just didn't go out of the house. People said, you know, you got to stay home. And then there came a proclamation that certain houses were designated as Jewish, that Jews were living there, and they put a big yellow Star of David on those houses, and we had to go and get all our outer clothing had to have a yellow star on it. You couldn't go on the street without it, and there was curfews. And I think it was I wrote down
You remember when the Germans marched?
Yes, I remember the Germans marching through the streets, the tanks and cars. And that was March 15. And then we were on Terrorist Group Harmons. And in June 1944, we had to move to this Yellow Star home. That was on Nagy-Mezőutca.
Before the Germans marched in, your father was not in this Hungarian labor
No, he was
camp?
called.
After?
He was called up after the Germans came.
After. So when the Germans came in, do you remember, was there any family conference?
Yes, there were.
What's
Well,
going
first,
on?
my father felt that we should go to Nagy and go to the terminal. We packed up our clothes and we were going to go over there. And then he decided it was not a good idea, that we should stay where we were, and we went back to the apartment. Unfortunately, we didn't go. If we would have went, they were deporting the people from the outside of Budapest first.
Mm-hmm.
So in June, when we moved to this house that was designated as a Jewish house, we were assigned one room in an apartment that were occupied by other people. And we knew, my parents knew these people, so we moved over there. My father was already in the labor battalion, so it was my mother and my two sisters. We all lived in one room. We shared a bathroom and a kitchen with the other people. And my father, every once in a while, would get leave and visit us from Friday evening till Sunday morning. And we were all kind of just waiting out to see what's going to happen. There were a lot of air raids. We would have to go into the basement. It was stop going to school.
Totally
Stop going to school. There was curfew. What time you could be on the street was only a certain time during the day you could be on the street. Food was hard to get.
How did you know how your mother got food?
Well, there was food available, but you could only go at certain times to certain markets. You couldn't go everywhere. And the money was a little tighter because my father wasn't working anymore. So they were using money that they had saved. They also felt that we should have clothing made in case we had to move someplace. So we all got shoes with triple soles on them, and my mother and my sisters made clothing for us for cold weather in case something had to be done. And
Before your father went away, did he talk to you? You were the only man in the family?
No, we had no discussion. It was supposed to be just temporary situation. We had never thought, our mindset was not that they're going to kill us. This was something that we just have to weather, like Jews all through the years had some problems, and then eventually it would go away. Obviously, it didn't.
Were there other children in the house?
Yes, there were a lot of children. We all got together. My sisters found other girls their age. As a matter of fact, one of the hospitals ran a program to teach girls to be nurses. And I remember my sisters were wearing white nurses' uniforms with a yellow star on them. And I think what happened was they started to, when they finished with all the Jews outside of Budapest, they started with the Hungarian Jews. What happened was Admiral Horthy was deposed. The Nyilas, which is, you call him the Arrow, people.
Arrow Cross.
Arrow Cross
Hungarian Arrow
took
Cross.
over, and they were systematically rounding up all the Jews.
While Horthy was still in power, was there any attempt made that you've continued school? There was tutoring or?
Not really, because there was really nobody around who would. There was no schools. The schools were closed. We couldn't travel freely anymore. No, there was nothing like that.
So life kind of just was on hold.
On hold, exactly. We lived from day to day. It was my sister Edith had a lot of Christian friends, and one day she just disappeared.
Your sister?
Edith.
Edith. She was the oldest?
She was the oldest. She just
Didn't
disappeared.
come
We didn't know what happened to her. And then my sister Erica was taken away. It was in October of '44. She had to report downstairs. In each building had a person who was in charge of the Jews, who knew where everybody lived, and they.
Only Jews lived at that time in the building.
Well, there were still some Christians, but not really. They would move out of the building as soon as they could. There were two businesses in the building. There was a movie and a bar, and those were Christian run. But they were on the ground floor, and basically we didn't really have access to them.
How about Super?
The super was still a Christian, and he reported to the man who was in charge of the building. And
did you get any instructions from your mother of how to be safe, how to behave?
well, stay away. Don't do anything that would create a problem. I mean, we had to be quiet. We couldn't really. The only place we could really run around was outside in a courtyard, because the buildings in Hungary, I don't know if you. It was built that basically they all had courtyards inside.
Yeah.
So you could run around there, and we had a bunch of children about my age, older and younger, and we'd all just play, run around.
You were still with your mother and
So my
two
mother- my-
sisters
well,
for a while.
then Erica was taken away.
If you remember back, did you, at that time, when you were still all together, did you feel safe
Yes.
protected?
Yes. Well, while we were still together, my father would visit, yes. But it got progressively worse. And
How did you notice this progression?
it was like my sister disappearing, my other sister being taken away.
When your sister disappeared, did somebody see her? From where did she
No,
disappear?
nobody knew where she went.
How did your mother react to that?
She must have known what she was going to do, because she just said, "You're not going to see Edith for a while." And later I found out what happened. One of her Christian's friends had a brother who was in the Arrow Cross, and he met her in the bar. She was able to go from the courtyard into the bar, and then he just walked her out, and nobody would question him. And then she went to live with another Christian friend in a different house that was not part of the yellow or the ghetto. Then they started building the ghetto, and like my aunt and uncle lived on Dobrushutsa, and they were part of the ghetto, but we were not allowed to go there, only if you already lived there. Then they started transferring some Jews over there.
But you were never part of the ghetto?
No,
The official
no.
ghetto?
No.
So Edith kind of escaped with some false papers?
Yes.
Probably from that
From
friend.
his friend,
that
yes.
friend. And you didn't hear from her for
For a long time.
a long time. And
Erica was taken, and she ended up in
how was she
Spandau.
taken?
Well, they had to report downstairs, and then they were all the girls of that age, and they were marched out.
What did she think? Where is she going? Just to report?
Nobody knew. Well, we knew it wasn't good.
Now, you were 10 years old at
10.
that time.
Yes.
You remember that you actually knew that something is...
Oh, absolutely. We used to talk, all the boys used to talk to each other, and we were losing fathers, sisters, brothers. I mean, they were just all disappearing from our life.
You grew up pretty fast, and...
I don't think we had a choice. Those who didn't grow up died.
So when Erika was...
Yeah, she left October.
Was she able to come home and say goodbye to, or just...
When she went downstairs, that was it.
That was
Then November 9th, my mother found out that they're going to close the houses down permanently. And she decided that maybe it would be better for us to try to escape. So she took me through the bar, but the bar owner's wife reported it to the man who was running the building, and then police came and took us away to their precinct. It was on Mozharutsa. And we spent the
your
night...
mother and you together?
My mother and I, we were put downstairs in the basement of this police station, and there was an old sergeant there who was not a great believer of what was happening, and he was said that it's really, there's nothing he can do. The Germans are in control, and it's a shame, but there's nothing he can do. And in the morning, the police escorted back to the house, and then my mother was taken away, and I was left alone.
So the policeman took you back to the house with your mother, and immediately took the mother away?
Like in an hour later, all the women had to report downstairs, and they were marched out.
And you were left alone?
Yes.
Did your mother say something to you?
She kissed me and said, "Take care of yourself."
Were there any adults in the building?
By that time, there were no adults left in the building, just children. A little older, a little younger than I was. And what we did was forage for food from the different apartments. And we just lived that way for weeks.
Without any adult?
Without any adult supervision.
Just taking care of yourself?
Yes.
We'll continue in a minute. The house of Mr. Ervin Rosenfeld in Woodbury, New York, in the United States of America, and I'm Marianne Cador. Could you kind of recall the feelings you had when you were left alone there?
Yes, we were absolutely terrified because we had nobody to talk to that could tell us what to do. Our primary interest was to eat something. And we played with the other children, and about a week or so later, we were able to...
Was anybody taking, like, leadership? Was there one child who was kind of took
There were
over?
some older children, a few years older, that kind of, helped find food and things like that, but nobody really took any leadership. And I remember about a week or so later, I ran outside the house with a couple of other children, and so happened that my father's friend, who was in the same building, we used to live in the same building, and together the two men went away to the labor battalion, and his wife and my mother were together on this march towards Germany. Saw me on the street, and he was with Hungarian soldiers who were taking him and other men someplace. And he saw me on the street, and he persuaded the sergeant to stop the cart, and they took me with them. And that's how I met with my father again. They were then billeted at a sports arena outside of Budapest. and they were waiting to be sent to Germany.
And this soldier took you to
To my father. He was in the same, there was the unit that he was with, and I met my father there, and we spent about 4 or 5 days together.
Where?
This was at this stadium in Budapest, where they were hundreds of Jewish men under the guards of Hungarian soldiers. And he had obviously a Christian captain who said to my father that you have to get rid of him because we are leaving for Germany. And he got his soldiers, all the children, into a wagon and covered us with hay and told them to drive us to a Red Cross house.
When you went to see your father, did he hear from you what happened to the sisters?
Yes, yes, I told her what happened. We cried, and he said, just stay strong, and we just have to do the best we can.
Did you make some plans where you would meet eventually?
Well, we all said that my aunt and uncle lived on Dobutsa in the ghetto, that if anybody ever gets anywhere, we all told each other that's where we should meet, because they were really the only place that wasn't going to change, we thought. So after we spent a few days together, they packed all the children into this horse-drawn cart, put straw over us.
So there were more children, not just
Yes, there were more,
you,
because they found children all over, and if they recognized them, they would take them back to the... Because all the
and
men...
it was tolerated, sort of.
Well,
at
the
that
captain
place.
was a very decent man. And
So you were.
we said goodbye to my father, and that was the last time I ever saw him.
Did he bless you?
Yes. The sergeant drove us to this house that had a Red Cross on it, and they were guarded by the Arrow Cross people and German soldiers, that nobody was supposed to go in. And the captain told the soldiers that not to come back if anything happens to us. So the soldiers told the Germans and the Arrow Cross that if they have to fight to get us in, they would. So they let us through. And this was a factory building that had bunks built for, and there were hundreds and hundreds of children there. And we
Do
got...
you know where this was?
I have no idea.
No.
And as we got there, it was about lunchtime. They gave us some soup and some bread, and then we would stay in these little bunks because there was no room to move around. And one night, there was a lot of cursing, screaming, carrying on. We woke up, it was in the middle of the night, and they started to tell everybody to come off the beds and start going downstairs. And there were Germans set up with machine guns and shooting all the children. I toppled over a body and I fell down, and a lot of children fell on top of me. And after everybody left, there were a few that survived, and some of the adults from the Red Cross and the Swiss legation tried to help. And by that time, I didn't know this, my mother has escaped from the death march and worked her way back to Budapest. And I had a cousin living there that was found me, but she couldn't take me with her. But she got in touch with our old super from Terry's Garut, and they got to me, and by that time I had fever because I was wounded, and I was in bad shape.
You were wounded by the gunshots?
Just slightly,
Like,
but I was exposed then. It was outside, so I had a fever, and I really didn't know what was happening. They took me to there. Our house originally we lived in was bombed, so they lived somewhere else, and they took me in.
who are you talking about?
This was Horvat. They were the original superintendents of our building.
And his name was Horvat?
Horvat, yes. And they hid me in their apartment, but they were afraid because they were searching all the apartments looking for Jews. And the only medication they had was aspirin, so they gave me aspirins, and after a few days my fever went down, and then my cousin got to my mother, told her where I was, and my mother came and took me to this house in the Christian sector, and she already had false papers. She went to the police and told them that we were Christians who escaped from the Russians, and they issued us papers that we could stay in Budapest. And then we went to this apartment building.
What was your cover story?
That we lived in Nagleta, and the Russians were already there, and we had to run away because the Germans told us we had to leave. So we worked our way to Budapest.
And that she doesn't have any papers?
She doesn't have any papers. Everything was left behind, so new papers were issued.
She was an Orthodox woman who had a sheitel.
But by that time, her hair grew out because when she went away in November, her sheitel was lost. Mm-hmm. What happened was they were marching towards Germany, and she and this other woman that she knew from the building kept falling further and further behind. And then one night just jumped into a draining ditch that ran along the road. And as the column went past them, they hid into some haystacks. And they worked their way back to Budapest.
What was their destination?
The rest of the people never got to Germany. They put them on these slips on the Danube. You know what slips are? Those are flat boats and they just piled them in like cattle. And they took them to the middle of the Danube and sunk them and killed all they could.
And that was in the vicinity of Budapest? Or
much further towards Germany. And,
but still in Hungary?
Still in Hungary.
And your mother just walked her way back?
Just walked her way back. She had some help from peasants. They would feed them, and one peasant took them in a cart and took them for a while. There were decent people in Hungary. And we lived in that building, and it turned out, which I didn't know, my sister Edith was in that building because our cousin arranged to have false papers made for them much earlier, and he had a friend that lived in that building, and that's Christian friends, and that's where he put Edith. And we were not supposed to know her.
Did your mother know that Edith is...
Yes, we knew. She knew, but again, she could not acknowledge her at all. We would, even if what happened was we lived on different floors in that building. Food was very difficult to obtain by then. The Russians were closing in. Bombing happened all the time.
Was there a lot of air raids?
A lot of air raids, and then after...
What happened when an air raid...
we would have to go into the basement. And we had to be very... I was told that I couldn't talk. I had to be very quiet, because if they found out we were Jewish, then we would be killed.
You remember that feeling down?
Oh, absolutely. I hid inside the basement into a smallest corner I could find.
Were you scared of the bombs?
I was most scared of being discovered. Because Germans, what they used to do, if they found a man they didn't know what he was, make them drop their pants. And only Jews were circumcised in Europe. So there was absolutely no way of hiding what you were. Then we moved into the basement permanently when the Russians were starting to storm the city. They were cannon fired every minute.
The whole house moved down to
The whole house moved into
How
the
did
basement.
that basement look?
It was a basement. It was
It was a cellar.
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 I mean, it was not that wasn't fixed. We just took mattresses down. There was no water.
Toilet?
No toilet. We'd run upstairs to the apartments to go to the toilet. And there was firing all the time. And
this was in the winter?
this was the winter of 1944 to 45. We went into the basement December of 44.
Was it a cold winter?
Well, sure, it was a cold winter. And every once in a while, we'd just go outside to go upstairs to the apartment, go to the bathroom, wash. That's all you could do. That. After a while, there wasn't any water at all because water was shut down or was ruined or whatever.
Just going back a little bit, when you finally showed up in this house with the person who took you there and you met your mother, what kind of a reunion was that?
It was very difficult because the two other women who lived in that same apartment, they did not want me there because I could be their downfall. They were also escapees, and my mother had to fight them constantly to keep me.
They thought that you would give someone
Give them away, yes.
Because you
And,
were a child?
yes, and because a male child.
Mm-hmm.
So I was told that I had to be very quiet. I couldn't do anything. It was terrible. It was I stopped being a child. I was not the same person. It was like you go through a transformation into a different person in your mind. You just can't accept what was really happening, and you have to become somebody else.
And that's when it happened, you think, when you went to that building, or was like a gradual?
It started when I was left alone. It was almost impossible to believe that I don't have any adults who would take care of me. And then when I met with my father, and I knew that he couldn't help me at all. I mean, he was no longer in charge of anything, not even of his own life. And then when the Germans, it's just, your mind shuts down. You live as a robot, basically.
Do you remember if you ever cried?
We cried all the time. We cried, and children are cruel. I mean, even the children we were with, they were stealing from each other. I lost my shoes because somebody, while I was sleeping, took my shoes in the Red Cross house because they didn't have any. So to have some kind of shoes, I had to steal somebody else's shoes. And the ones I got had holes in the bottom.
And you had the double?
I had the triple sole shoes, which was
soles.
good. But, I mean, you did what you had to do to survive. I don't think I ever recaptured that feeling of safety.
So finally those, your mother's roommates accepted you?
Well, when we moved down into the basement, it was not an acceptance. It was just nobody, I mean, we were all scared the Russians were coming, and we knew that, and they were terrible. The Russians were as bad as the Germans. Not because
Before
of
they
that.
came, though, how were you eagerly waiting for them?
Of course, that was going to be our freedom, back to being free.
Did you hear any news from the outside world? What's
After a
happening?
while, there were very little news because you couldn't play the radios anymore. When we were in the basement, there were no radios at all.
And the front moved back
We moved
and
them forth, yes. There were One day there were Germans firing from our doorway. One day it was Russians firing from our doorway. Russians came into the basement. Then the Germans came back into the basement, and then finally the Russians just overran that part of the city. And they were...
So what happened when they finally took over that part of the city?
Well, then we came out of the basement, went back up into the apartment, and we were allowed to go out anywhere we wanted. The ghetto wasn't freed for a little bit later. As a matter of fact, I remember my mother told me it was January 1945, about the middle of January 1945 when we were freed. The ghetto was freed on January 18th, 1945. And then my mother and I and my sister Edith walked to my aunt's apartment on Dobutsa 27. And we found my aunt and uncle there.
Before that, what happened when the Russians finally came in and you were in your apartment?
Well, when we were in the basement, the Russians finally came in, and they were stealing, raping, pillaging, whatever you can think of. We told, when we walked out, we told them we were Jews, and they felt, they left us alone. As a matter of fact, I was running around outside, and a Russian officer gave me a gun to protect ourselves with.
Did you take it upstairs?
I took it upstairs. I went outside with it, and they told us, it's for you. And
were you a big child?
Yeah, more or less.
Was the gun loaded?
Yes. And we met a Russian soldier who spoke Yiddish. He said, "You see a German coming." And then when we went to the ghetto, I got rid of the gun. I didn't want it anymore. Because I had to shoot a German.
Did you?
Yes.
Did she die?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I even felt bad about that. I'll tell you that right now. He was hiding in the park. I was walking by.
Would he have killed you?
I have no
You don't
idea.
know.
But I wasn't taking any chances.
And you were how old then? 11.
11. Not quite 11.
Did you tell your mother?
No.
Did you tell anybody?
No. Not for years.
So what happened next?
We stayed with my aunt and uncle. And in May of 1945, my sister Erika came back from Spandau. She worked at a munitions factory, and she was
In Spandau, Germany?
Germany. She was in bad shape.
Did you know that she was alive till then?
No.
She
We
just-
used to go every day to the Red Cross to see who was coming home. We used to look for my father's name. And
And Erika just walked in the hand?
well, at the Red Cross you left where you were. So everybody went to the Red Cross. And the names were there who survived, and they left on the bulletin boards they left notices so families could get together. And
What shape was your mother in, emotionally and physically?
she never believed that my father was not coming back. We lost everything. The building that we lived in was bombed out, the original building. The other building, after everybody left, the Christians just stole everything that was there. Well, she tried to get it back, and she found some of our stuff, and she wrote a whole description of all the material that was stolen from us, and reported that the man who was in charge of the building still lived there, and nobody did anything about it. because Hungary in 1945 was not back to a free society. The old police and everybody was still in charge. The Russians really didn't do that much to change things. They would just kept going up to Germany. They didn't really care. And we met some people that were with my father at Mauthausen. And he survived the war, but he was sick. And they were getting ready to come back. And the Russians were guarding a bunch of German prisoners, and a prisoner escaped. So they grabbed my father to fill in the amount that was for the person that was missing. And while he was there, he wanted to run back so he could come home, and they killed him.
They shot him?
Yes.
And that was reported by a person who saw this?
Yes.
You know who the person was?
My mother knew him. He was with my father in that house.
He was an eyewitness to this?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Is he still alive, you think?
No. That generation is not here anymore.
Mm-hmm. But this was a pretty authentic
Yes.
story.
My father never came back. They were friends. They knew each other from before the war.
And he witnessed this.
He witnessed it, yes. And he begged my father not to run.
Mm-hmm.
But he just wanted to come home.
Otherwise they would have taken him
To Russia.
to Russia. Mm-hmm. So when your mother heard that,
She didn't believe it.
she was still hoping that
She was
he
still
would
hoping
go.
that it was a mistake. But then she realized after a while that it's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Did you hear this before Erica came home?
No, way after.
So how did Erica arrive?
She came on there were trains running from Germany to Hungary, repatriating people who were taken away. And she had some emotional scars that to this day, she never told us what happened. I know she has scars on her body.
Erica is your sister who lives in California?
No, she lives here in Lawrence and Florida.
And she never told you or the family
No.
what happened?
No.
She was in bad physical shape too when she came back?
Not, yeah, but after a while she was young,
Yeah.
and she snapped back. Food was available. As a matter of fact, we went back the night later to see if any of the family survived. And
When was that about?
that was the winter of 45. I remember because we had to walk from Debrecen to night later. My mother was there before us, and my sisters were there before me, and this man took me on a train, and we went to Debrecen, and then we had to walk from there to night later. And I know it was winter because we rested in the snow, and we got to night later, and my mother was living at my aunt's house that we always used to stay in, and that house was stripped. That is a store that was all stripped, and we couldn't get anything back. Nobody wanted to give anything back. We stayed there for the winter, basically.
You had some food there.
We had the peasants would trade you food.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went back to Budapest in
Noid later, did you, as you were still a very young child, did you somehow contrast the place from the memories you had of it?
Well, I went to all the stores that I knew that the family used to own, and everything was stripped, and we looked around for just pictures or anything we could find. And
were there other Jewish families who came back from?
There came back a couple of young men. Reichgazer, I'll never forget him. He was, I would say, in his early 20s. And we were all, as a family. And he and my mother discussed that there's no future for Jews in Hungary. Because even after the liberation, Jews were not given anything back. So we came back to Budapest, and he and another young man with my mother and my sister decided that we're going to leave Hungary.
Were you involved in this family?
No, I was not involved.
No,
I was too young. They didn't think I could. But they told us what we had to do. We packed one little suitcase, and we went by train to...
You didn't even go back to Budapest anymore?
Yeah, we went back to Budapest, but we all got together. We got as much money as were available to get together, and we took a train to this town near the Austrian border, where we stayed, where the men tried to arrange transportation to go over. I remember Hungary was under Russian domination, and Austria was not. So it was, the Iron Curtain was already fallen.
Continue. The Ervin Rosenfeld in Woodbury, New York, October 22nd, 1995, and I'm Marianne Cador. While you were still in Hungary, were there a lot of people coming back from concentration camps? And
yes, a lot of people we knew from Budapest showed up, and we had discussions with them, and we tried to see if there's any life for Jews in Hungary. And the consensus was that it was never going to be like it was. I lost in the neighborhood of 200 family members.
from the extended family?
Extended family, cousins and uncles and aunts and their children. And my mother was one of 8. My father was one of 8. And they all had extended, family, and out of all of them, the only survivor was the Geiger family, was relations to us, cousins like. And there was one man left in Hungary who survived, and his brother, Andre, came back from a concentration camp crazy. He kept kosher in a concentration camp. But he was mentally unstable. And
was your family, was that an issue to keep kosher when you were in
No, my mother said that you had to do whatever you could to survive.
Right. So she was the one who arranged for your departing Hungary.
She arranged. Well, what happened was when we looked around, there was no family left. My aunt and uncle, who lived in the ghetto, did not want to move.
They were older.
They were older. They didn't want to change anything. My cousin who found me, her husband was also older. Didn't want to leave Hungary. That's all they knew. They also had a son that they felt they didn't want to leave Hungary. And there were a few other, total, there was another cousin, lady cousin, who didn't want to leave either. So they stayed behind. And when we went to this town near the Austrian border, we had to stay a few days before the arrangements could be made. And the man found a Russian officer who was willing to smuggle us out of Hungary for $25 American money. By that time, we were getting some money from my uncles here. They were able to send it through the Red Cross.
You had uncles in America?
My mother's 2 brothers came to the United States. One came in 1929, the other one came in 1939. And they were in business together. And during the war, they were in the sheet metal business, and during the war they did very well. And they, when they found us, my mother wrote to them from Hungary, and they started to support us.
And they encouraged your mother to
Yes.
to come.
To come. So we were smuggled across two at a time in the Russian officer's car. And we were deposited by a railroad station in Austria. And when we all got together, we took the train to Vienna. And I always tell everybody, I did Europe before it was fashionable. And in Vienna, we went to the Rothschild house. And this was set up as a refugee center. And as an ironical reversal of life, a lot of Christians try to escape as war criminals or everything as Jews. And in Rothschild House, everybody who came there had to read Hebrew. If you couldn't read Hebrew, you were not Jewish. So we stayed there a few days, and then they sent us into another town in Austria near Salzburg.
Which organization took over? Do you remember?
It was the Joint, and UNRWA later, but it was Joint who was in charge of the Rothschild House. They went to a camp near Salzburg, and then from there we went to Germany. We ended up in a camp in Leipheim, which was near Augsburg. And this was a camp run by the American Army through the UNRWA. It's the United Nations Relief Organization.
How do you spell Leipheim?
Leiphaim.
And this is near
Augsburg.
Augsburg?
Yes.
Oh, Augsburg.
That's a big town over
Augsburg,
there
yeah.
in Bavaria.
Yeah.
And they
And Augsburg is A-U-G?
A-U-G-S-B-U-R-G.
In Bavaria. Was that the place where Napoleon had a big...
No, that was Austerlitz.
and this was a
Displaced person camp.
camp.
And there we...
Lodge?
Very large. There was an old German Air Force base with runways and everything, and there we met a lot of people, and we were getting from my uncles that once a month they were sending us money to buy food with, even though they were food available from the camp, but this was you could buy food from the outside.
Were you free to move around?
Yes, it was free to move around. As a matter of fact, one of the men, Reiches, who was a chef, started cooking for the American Army in Munich. And he brought us over to Munich a couple of times, and they're the only ones who had oranges, obviously. I remember this is 1946 already, and I was then 12 years old. And we were on this train traveling from Munich back to Augsburg. And I was there with and by that time I was speaking German fairly fluently. And we were sitting in a train, and I was peeling an orange, and I hear this German woman say that the nice young man is going to give me some of his orange. And I said in German, not this lifetime. And then she started saying, verfluchte Ausländer. And I said, I'm not a verfluchte Ausländer, I'm a Jew. And you couldn't kill me. And nothing is ever going to get from me to you. It was a very strange train ride after that.
You remember this reaction you had?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sounds pretty angry.
I was.
And you were able to express it.
Well, I wasn't going to be any longer treated like I was a nobody.
So when was the transformation? When did that happen?
It happened in Leipheim. I met with a lot of... I became part of a semi-military organization. We were going to go to Israel. But my mother wanted to go to the United States to be with her brothers. And they gave me a lot of strength.
Did you continue schooling in the
Lifetime?
camp too?
Not really.
Nothing?
Nothing. There was nothing.
Jewish education?
Jewish education, yes, because they were rabbis or whatever, and they took all of us and started to do. I did my bar mitzvah in Lifetime
So the rabbis there prepared children
for the bar mitzvahs. Yes.
And you did it in a group or by
Well, mine was alone. They built not a synagogue, but they had a room that we were in, and
You remember it?
oh, very well.
How did it go?
It went very well. And afterwards, my mother had some cookies or something for people who came back. There was a lot of young men who were very friendly with us because of my sisters. They were at that time 19, 20 years old. So there was always young men in around, and they would take me around. And as a matter of fact, one of them got me a bicycle. Then I met a friend over there. And together we used to ride our bicycles all over every place.
The family was together and you got a room or a
My
house?
sisters and my mother and I were together in one room.
In one.
Yes.
And what did your sisters do?
Not a thing.
None
None of us did anything. There was no work.
And there was no formal schooling?
No.
So informally you kind of grew up though?
Yes. Well, we heard about the atomic bomb. We were discussing that. And I never forget, we were lying in a meadow. It was a beautiful day. And we were talking about how life is going to change for us. That we're not going to be the same people we were when we started out. It was just, we were talking about going to Israel. Of course, in those days you couldn't go to Israel. They were not allowing anybody in. And then we had friends who left and they would then be returned. It was a kind of a weird life. And then my sister Edith and I decided that we were going to get to the United States earlier if we went to a children's camp. And we did that. We went to a place called Prien am Chiemsee. Prien. That was, we stayed at this resort hotel that Hitler used to go to. And of course,
that wasn't to go to Palestine.
No, that was going to the United States.
To United States.
And we were there about a year or so, and it was on a lake where Ludwig the Mad had a castle in an island. And it was
that was at Prien?
Prien.
Prien.
And Chiemsee was the lake.
How do you spell that?
I don't know. And
Chiemsee. Like
well, C-H-I,
yeah.
something like that. And anybody who knows Bavarian history, Ludwig the Mad had a castle built that looks like the Versailles. And he had a Meissen porcelain room that the only likeness of him was in there. And we used to take a boat across. We had sailboats available to us. So we sailed, we swam. We had a very good life, different life. And then...
What organization was which you joined then?
Well, that was not an organization. That was just a children's camp. And we had to pretend we were orphans. There was nobody else. That was the way we were going to get there. And then one of my relatives, not my uncles, but another relative from the United States arrived and brought my mother and my sister Erica to the camp. We all met there. I had some pictures of that. He came with a big Buick. He had a lot of money. It was just a very different thing. And that was close to Berchtesgaden, and we would go to Berchtesgaden every once in a while. And then after about a year or so, when it wasn't happening, we moved back to Lifetime so we could come together as a family. By this time, this was 48, we went back to Lifetime. About a year later, we finally got our papers.
So the war really didn't end for you in
Till
45.
1949, no.
You were,
We were displaced persons.
this was still a very unreal existence.
Absolutely. Unreal, and we still kind of had to fend for ourselves a lot. I remember riding our bicycles and trying to buy potatoes from the German farmers.
Did you cook for yourself sometimes?
My mother would cook, yes. She also would feed a goose. And then we would buy. And, you know,
By that time, she tried to do as much as she could for being Orthodox, or
oh, absolutely. I'm back to being Orthodox. In the camp, in Leipheim, we were Orthodox.
you were? Was that difficult?
Yes, it was. It would have been certainly a lot easier to not to observe anything, but we were Orthodox.
When you had your bar mitzvah and you next day you were a man, was there any change for you?
I became a man in 1944. This was just a formality.
Did you feel special weight on you?
Weight never left.
Never lifted.
Never.
Never lifted.
They stole my childhood.
Do you think about it sometimes now?
Lately I have. I was talking to my wife. I said to her, I wonder what our life would have been. And we would have never met if this didn't happen. I would have been brought up in Hungary. I would have been Orthodox. I don't know what I would have done. It was just, my life was never planned yet. I don't know. But it certainly would have been different than it is here.
So you went back to Leipheim, and the family was again together.
Yes.
And you
And
finally got your papers?
But what happened, my sister Erica's papers didn't arrive at the same time as my mother's, Edith's, and I. And we went to Bremenhaven in winter of 1949, something like January or February. And that was an embarkation point. And while we were going for the last checkup to the doctors, I got German measles. So they had to quarantine me for 6 weeks. And it's a funny story, but we didn't know this was going to happen. And the night before, we sold all our clothes to Germans, and we decided to have one good meal in a restaurant. We spent all our money, and then they wouldn't let me go because the next morning they saw I had German measles. They put me into this hospital off the camp we were in Bremenhaven, which was isolation, and I was the only patient. And I had 3 doctors and 3 nurses. And all we did all day long was play chess, and I was learning English. And
your mother?
my mother and sister had to wait 6 weeks. They finally got some money from my uncles because we even sold our winter coats. We didn't think we were going to need everything. So then we left. It was in May 1949 we finally got on the ship.
How was the ride?
It was stormy. Atlantic was pretty stormy. And we arrived in Boston.
Was it full with refugees?
Full with displaced persons.
With displaced persons. A lot of children too?
A lot of everything, yes. And then we arrived in Boston. And the Joint sent a telegram to my uncle Arnold. And they met us at the Pennsylvania Railroad station. It took us back to their apartment.
You remember that day?
Oh, absolutely. Took us back to our
Was it
apartment
sunny?
in Bronx. Yes, it was. As a matter of fact, that was the hottest summer in years in 1949. It was a very hot summer, but they had an apartment for us that they bought from people they kept for over a year in the Bronx on Westchester Avenue. And after we arrived, of course, we didn't have anything. They took us and bought us clothes. The apartment was fully furnished.
Did you have any, like on the boat, any fantasies, any expectations?
No.
What will
No.
happen now?
No. I knew we had uncles who helped us out. And then my cousin lived not too far from where we were. That was the cousin that left in 1939 with her mother. And I spent that summer basically going to the movies to learn English. And my mother and my two sisters got jobs. They were working in factories to make clothes. And I did the laundry and all those things that had to be done.
You went to school?
I went to school.
What school?
James Monroe High School. I started as a freshman. I was 15 years old. The last time I went to school was in 1944. And I was very lucky. That school had a very progressive principal, and they formed classes for foreign-born, and they had assigned us a speech teacher who would work. And we were Italians and Puerto Ricans and all different nationalities, and we were taught English the way it should be. We had a special English teacher, and by the time I was a sophomore, I was in mainstream.
Regular class. And did you work also?
Oh yes, I had a job. I swept up a factory, collected the bottles. I would go from the school right to the job. It was on Fordham Road. And
you continued Orthodox life?
I did. My mother would give me sandwiches. Steak with me, I couldn't eat in the cafeteria. And my entire high school life, I had two kinds of sandwiches: cream cheese with green peppers or salami. That was it.
Do you remember how the other children received you?
Well, I made friends, and it's just regular.
Some
Nothing
of the
special.
feeling of security returned, some level of it?
Yes, it was. A lot of the people would go away for the summer to camp. I wouldn't. We couldn't afford anything like that. My aunt and uncles would pick us up on a Sunday and drive us to a beach or something.
Were they cousins your age? Or?
I had a cousin, a girl cousin. I had two cousins from my other uncle. They were older than I was. I had some cousins, yes, and they were. They had a big family here from my aunt's side, and I remember we would go with them everywhere. It started to be a more normal life, if you want to call it that, not having a father and not having any real money.
Did anybody ask you about your experiences in Europe?
Let me didn't talk about it.
No.
Took me a long time to talk about it.
So what happened when you graduated?
Well, by that time, my sisters were married. One moved to California, the other one moved to Queens, and my mother decided to move to the same building to be near her daughter. So the last year, my senior year, I would take the subway from Queens to the Bronx because I didn't want to transfer. Then I went into college. Queens College was free, and I had jobs. I worked summers as a busboy. I worked some summers as a short order cook. I did everything I could to make money. And then I took a part-time job while I was going to school in Manhattan for this company that did, in those days it was only film. There was television, but there wasn't any videotape yet. And I stayed with the company for a while, and then when I finished school, they wanted me to go work for them full-time.
And that's the same line you are now?
Yes. Well, I went from film to videotape. In 1960, I married my wife, and the same year, the business that I was working for was sold, and we went on a honeymoon not knowing that I have a job. We got back, I was working, and then in 1964, people I did some work for asked me if I would form a company for them, which I did.
So you continued to be in the same line, what you
Same
started
line.
as a student.
Yes.
Is your wife a survivor, from a survivor family?
No, no. She is from an old line. Her father's side are German. Her mother's side came from Holland in the 1600s.
Meanwhile, your mother still lived with you.
My mother still lived. We lived together till I got married.
Did she ever tell you about her experiences?
Actually, what happened was we moved here in 1967. I already had 3 children. And in the early 70s, she would come out and visit. Early 70s, I sat down with her and I asked her to put on an audio tape of what happened to us. And she did that. We spent the weekend doing that. And I transcribed those notes to her story. And then I decided it was time to tell my story too. So I did both at the same time. I put it into a record. The first time I was able to tell anybody from the temple, we formed a Havara group. And I told my mother's story at one of the meetings.
How did that feel to you?
It was very emotional, very difficult.
That was her story, though.
Both of our stories. And interestingly enough, my children never wanted to know it.
Tell me about your children.
I have a son, Michael. He was born in 1962. Son, David, he was born in 1963. And a daughter, Elizabeth, was born in 1967. They're all married. My son, David, lives in Chicago with his wife. My daughter, Elizabeth, is up in Albany with her husband. She's pregnant and she's going to have a baby boy in February of next year. My son, Michael, lives a few blocks away from here. They have a daughter, Sarah Rachel, who's the most wonderful little girl.
How old are they, the grandchildren?
My granddaughter is 15 months old.
Do you remember when Michael was born?
Yes,
what
of course.
kind of feelings? What went through your mind?
It was very important for me to have a son to carry on the name because there wasn't much left.
You named him after your father?
Yes. His Hebrew name is Shmuel Mikhail. Came after my father and one of my uncles.
You remember their childhood? Did you play with them a lot?
As a matter of fact, unfortunately, that was the time I was very involved in business and I worked tremendous hours. And I basically saw them on the weekends. By the time I would come home, they would be asleep. I would leave before they woke up. But I'm able to play with my granddaughter.
Yeah. Do you remember then when Michael was like 10 years old, just about the time you had all this horrible
We always
memory?
protected them. They were not grown up. They were children.
But do you remember what you felt at that time?
That I never want them to go through what I did. I wanted them to stay children. I wanted to have a good life, provide them whatever I could to make their life good.
Were you strict,
Yes, according to them, very.
protective?
Absolutely. But they all went away to school. Michael went to Albany. David started at the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, and then he went to a school near here, then he went to a school of visual art in New York. Elizabeth went to Binghamton. They all graduated college.
Maybe we continue in a minute. To Ervin Rosenfeld in Woodmere, New York. Woodbury, New York. I'm Marianne Kedor, and the date is October 22nd, 1995. What do you think, what effect had your experiences had on the way you brought up your children?
I think I was overprotective. I did not want them to leave the house as much. I wanted to hold on to them. Hold on to everybody that I love. I didn't want to be separated from them. It was very difficult for me to let go. I had to go through years of therapy to be able to be more easily letting go.
Did your wife understand all these feelings?
I don't think I was able to talk about feelings. Not till I finished therapy.
When was that?
In the 80s. And even now, I'm not exactly what you might call a very easy person to get along with.
Mm-hmm. Who suggested the therapy?
My wife did.
Did she go to it?
She had, yes.
And the children?
No.
No, wasn't family therapy?
No.
No. And how did your experiences add to your Jewish identity? What changes occurred in life?
When I became 18, I really had a hard time with religion. Losing so much of my family and my father, I could understand how religious people who were always good, this could happen to. And I felt that the religion that I belonged to, I wouldn't give it up, but I couldn't really believe in it as much as I used to or I should have. And for a long time I would not attend synagogue, or I used to line Tefillin every day till I was 18, and I just stopped. And when I met my wife, her family, and she was very active in the Reform synagogues. They lived in Laurelton. And she asked me to go to a couple of services, which is totally foreign to somebody who was an Orthodox. But when we got married, she decided actually she wanted to belong to the same synagogue that she belonged to before, because we moved to that area. And I became active, and I couldn't be Orthodox anymore, but Reform Judaism was something that I could live with. And I became active in a temple. And when we moved out here, we joined in a conservative synagogue, but it wasn't something I could do. And my son Michael was not able to handle that we were not kosher, and all the other, and the children and other people were telling them that we should do this, we should do that. So we transferred to a Reform congregation.
Are your children observant?
My daughter is, more or less. Not really.
Joining the temple added something to your feeling of
Well, I
belonging?
started to get some feelings back of being Jewish, but it really, we transferred about 5 years ago to a new synagogue in Dix Hills called Temple Beth Dora. The rabbi there is Mark Gelman, who's a wonderful, wonderful man. And now when I go to service, I got some solace.
In the sense of belonging somewhere?
Yes. And it's not only belonging. I always felt belonged in the North Shore Synagogue also. It's just maybe because I'm getting older. I just feel that I need that now.
When did your mother die?
She died about 3 years ago. Let me see. So 92.
Was she able to see grandchildren?
No. She has grandchildren from my sisters. She has a lot of them. She has 2 from Erica and 2 from Edith. Yeah, she knew her grandchildren from my sisters.
Did you ever visit Hungary?
I went back about the first time about 4 years ago. We went back with my wife, my 2 sisters, and their husbands. And we walked. We did a dedication for my father. There's a tree they put up in the Dohanytse temple where they have silver leaves for all the Holocaust people who died. And we bought a leaf. And when we went back, we went to the synagogue, and I saw the Torahs had just very plain covers on them. And my brother and I decided that next time we go back, we're going to take Torah covers with us. And we did that. Second time went back. My brother-in-law, Bob, who lives in California, was terribly affected by the war. He came from Budapest also, and he spent his time in Budapest during the war, and he saw the Dohanytse temple was used to store the Jewish dead. They piled them up like cordwood in the courtyard. And he also saw them shooting by the Danube. They would line up Jews and just shoot them into the Danube. And he was very much affected by that. He changed his name.
So much so. When you went back to Hungary, were you able to meet some of the
I met my 2 cousins.
good people who actually helped you a lot?
No, I didn't meet them.
The super...
They were no longer alive. But my mother, for as long as she could, she sent them packages every year. She went back in the 70s because a night later they were going to get rid of the Jewish cemetery. So she went back to see her parents' grave before they destroyed them.
So what is still very vividly alive for you of this?
Well, I still
lost
get
childhood?
flashbacks of different things. There are times when I think about my father a lot.
As you get older?
How I would have liked him to meet my children.
That's a pain, that's a constant pain.
Constant pain. He never knew my children.
He never knew you either.
No.
Never saw your successes. Is there anything you would like to add? Anything I didn't ask or didn't
The only
touch
thing
on?
I can add to this is that we have to make sure that people remember. I have no family, just my own. How they can take away your whole life, I don't understand.
The whole history.
And in my heart, I can never forgive.
Thank you very much, and maybe we will see now other pictures, and we'll meet your wife. Mr. Rosenfeld, tell us who is
That
this
is my mother, Charlotta Bernstein Rosenfeld. That picture is taken, I would say, in the 20s, 1920s.
Was she married already?
I don't know. It looks like she was married because I know they were married fairly young.
Wait, whenever I'm ready.
And would you tell us the origin of this picture?
That is my father in 1916. That's his. He was a soldier in World War I in the Hungarian army. He was a telephone person. This is his soldier's book, and in the book, he's marked that he's a Jew, and he was decorated. That's not in the book, and there's a number of pages that says of different things about him.
Was he proud to be a Hungarian soldier?
Very much so. He was decorated, and he was always proud that he served, and he served well.
And
This is my mother and father. This is about 1942. This is taken in Budapest. It's just a portrait picture that was taken by them.
and this is your father?
This is my father. It was taken, I would think, in 1943. This was probably a picture taken for his railroad pass.
He looks like a man who wants to take on the world. What picture is this?
My father, there's a little mark on it. He was taken away to serve in a labor battalion, and this is 1944, and it's a Hungarian soldier guarding him. They were building roads.
This was when Jews were not taken to the Hungarian army anymore.
That's correct. They were conscripted into labor battalions.
And this is?
This is myself and my mother in Budapest, 1936. This was just a picture that we took as a sort of a picture that looked interesting, like we were in an aeroplane.
So there was happy times.
Yes.
And what was the occasion for this photo?
This is March 1944, the end of March. We were required to wear yellow stars on our outer clothing. It's my father and mother, my sister Edith, my sister Erica, and myself. We took the picture because this was before my father was going to be taken away. We wanted to have a family picture before he left so we could all carry it.
And whose decision was to wear the star?
The star was not a decision. It was decreed by the government.
I mean to be photographed with this.
Because it was sewn on our clothes, and we happened to have been not wearing an overcoat. My mother and my sisters were wearing a coat which had the star on it. We only wore jackets, and it was sewn on.
So this was about the last picture the family was together.
Yes, this is our last family picture.
How about this one?
This is a picture of my mother and my two sisters and myself. The three of us, my sister Edith, I, and my mother, were embarking on a truck that we were going to take to the railroad to go to Bremenhaven. This is in 1949. And my sister Erica, who does not have the tag on her, was left behind because the paperwork did not arrive in time.
Where are you here?
This is the train that was going to take us to Bremenhaven. The window that's lowered that says for Army personnel only. It was a U.S. Army train that took us there. It's my mother, my sister Edith, and myself.
And Erica left behind
Well, Erica
for
left
another
behind.
trip. And this telegram?
This telegram was to my Uncle Arnold in the Bronx, telling them that we were arriving that day to meet us, and it's May 15th, 1949.
Arriving from where?
From Germany to Boston, and then by train from Boston to Penn Station.
And
This was the tags that we were traveling with as an identification when we were on a ship. 292 was my mother's, 704 was mine. And when we reached Boston, we could take it off.
would you introduce this picture,
Yes.
please?
This is my and Ariel's wedding picture, February 6, 1960. We were married at Hotel Brewster, and we had whatever family I had and Ariel's family present.
And this is your daughter?
This is my daughter Elizabeth and Brian Epstein on October 20th, 1991, when they were married. And now she's expecting a baby boy, February of 96.
And they live?
They live in Albany, New York, where they both work at a computer store that they own.
And this is son,
My son Michael,
the oldest son?
my oldest son, Michael Scott, and his wife, Susan Taylor, November 1st, 1992. And this was South Huntington Jewish Center. And this reunion produced my granddaughter, Sarah Rachel.
And Michael is the person who is with you
Michael works in the
in
company,
your company.
and he also lives just a few blocks away from us, and we get to see my granddaughter a lot.
This is son
My son David
David.
and his wife Lisa. This is July 10th, 1993. This picture is at the reception.
Yeah.
No, this is a picture of their wedding day, which was in Boise, Idaho.
And they live now?
They live now in a suburb of Chicago called Downers Grove, and he's a graphic artist, and she works for PIA Craft.
And who is this young lady?
This is my granddaughter, Sarah Rachel. She was born July 28th, 1994. She is the most wonderful little girl. She always smiles. She is just incredible. She is bright, alert, does many things, and absolutely wonderful to have her.
Would you introduce your wife, Mr. Rosen?
Yes, this is Ariel Weisberger Rosenfeld. We were married in February 6, 1960. She has been my rock. She has been my supporter. She has been my life.
Would you like to say something to your husband?
That I love him and I support him. And our life has had its ups and downs, but I would not trade it one day of it. And I hope that our children and our children's children will see these tapes and understand. I think our children would wish that Irv was born in Brooklyn or the Bronx and had a life like the rest of their friends, family do. I don't think that they understand how traumatic his life was, but I think that he became very Americanized because he was only 15, and perhaps the children got the best of both worlds. Our sons give flowers to their girlfriends and are very charming, have a stick-to-itness that's important, but they have all the American things that boys of their age would have. Irv loves our daughter very, very much and treated her like a princess from the minute she was born. So life hasn't always been easy, even after we were married, but we share it, and that's the most wonderful thing.
Thank you very much for the interview.